God bless everybody today. It is July 8th of 2026. I hope everybody had a blessed and safe 4th of July. I know there was a lot going on out there, and then it seemed like right after the 4th, we started to see everything break down again in the Middle East, and so there is a lot of things to talk about here. This is an extremely important video. I have found a new date stamp that I think reflects right now. Actually, I found it on the 4th, and I've been trying to produce what I need to produce to show it to you in the last few days. I've been trying to verify all this stuff. So I have found a new date stamp. It reflects what's going on right now with Iran and the ceasefire that seems to be breaking down and these new attacks across the Middle East. And so I've been trying to explain that there's date stamps built into the Bible that reflect four kings of the past to four kings of today. So when I mean kings, I mean leaders of countries or nations in the past to today. And you can see I have four of them. The one we're going to concentrate on this date stamp, and I'm not going to go into the complexity of all the date stamping, but I will go through how I got this date stamp so that it reflects where we are today and it makes sense. It will reflect Issac Herzog, which I believe reflects Jehoiakim in the history books in the Bible. He is the Israeli president today. He came in July 7th of 2021 and is still presently the leader of Israel. It's not Netanyahu. Netanyahu's not the president. He's not the leader of Israel. Reuben Rivlin was the leader prior to Issac Herzog coming in. I believe he reflects Zedekiah, and I have multiple date stamps with him also, but we're not going to go into those today, just the one that I found recently about Issac Herzog. He was also the Israeli president from July 24, 2014 to July 7, 2021. So I wanted you to see the connection and how this moved through. I do believe Reuben Rivlin, since he's there, he will be affected as we move forward in the next at least 8 months. We'll see how that turns out. But let's go into this new date stamp that I found about Issac Herzog, and it actually reflected the fifth year, exactly the fifth year of his start of his presidency on July 7th, which was yesterday. So, and then it works through the 21st, and then we'll just have to see what happens as we move forward. So everything in the Middle East started breaking down around the end of the 4th. And then you also have this leader of Iran being buried at this moment in time, which will actually end on Thursday. And so there's a lot going on there. But then we had some attacks by Iran on some tankers, which then Trump retaliated. And then we've had an escalation back and forth. I want to show you that we actually, if I had seen this, and I knew before it happened, but I couldn't produce the video fast enough so that I could explain it to you. But I will have other date stamps as we move forward, because now I have a new resource that I'm looking at that I believe fills all the holes and gaps that we have in the chart right now. So I'll explain all this as we move forward. I want to make this a fairly quick video. So I'm going to start with this. In this article, Israel recognizes Armenian genocide and rebuke of Turkey. Now, this infuriated Turkey. This is not going to make him happy at all, because he's the one that's been genociding the Armenians through the Azerbaijans up in that northern portion of the Middle East. So I found this article extremely important because this started a chain of events, I believe, that brings us to where we are right now, because there is a lot happening over in the Middle East and actually in Turkey itself. So Erdogan rejects Israel's Armenian genocide move and points to Gaza deaths. And so Erdogan has done a number of things recently, and you'll see those in the articles I'm going to try to produce for you. He has done a massive crackdown and arrested all of his opponents, so he's consolidating power at this moment in time. He has done a crackdown on the NATO meeting that they're having right now with Trump and everybody over there, and Trump has not been extremely happy because the Iranian thing is broken down, and so he's struggling with the narrative on how we're going to keep oil prices down, control the Iranians when there is no control method there. Erdogan is infuriated with this process because he doesn't want to look like a bad guy, just like he's genociding the Kurds or the Medes, as if you go back in history, the Kurds are the Medes, and so, and he also is looking like he has for 25 years taken over the majority of the Middle East, not through his own armies and things, but through proxies and through flatteries of trying to get these nations to work with him so he can rebuild his Ottoman footprint. But what I found on the 4th of July, amazingly, on the 250th year of our birth as a nation, I think is extremely important. I'll get into that right now. So we had this article come out on the 38th of June. It infuriated Erdogan, and then I also wanted to state that I've not added this date stamp to the chart yet. I'm in the process of updating that, but I wanted to get the video out so you could at least have the information, and I'll try to go through the updates as I move forward. This verse has been removed from the original books that were in the complete Bible. Now, I know that's going to be foreign to a lot of the people that read the King James Version and the Bibles in the United States, but you have to understand that churches, and this is why I get down on the churches, because they don't want you to have all the information, they don't want you to know where this is going, and they haven't been honest with you in a lot of ways, and that's why I'm not institutionalized in that process, okay? Look, if you go to the first book of Baruch, and I'll explain who Baruch is because he's the scribe to Jeremiah. So Baruch was sent to Jeremiah by God and Jesus so that he could scribe Jeremiah as he was going through all the temple disasters and everything that was going on during the Roman age and different things like that. These books were removed from the Bible. The Ethiopian complete Bible has 88 books. The King James Version has 66 books. Okay? You're missing in America in most churches because you use the King James Version or some spin-off of that, depending on the interpretation and the whatever. You're missing a quarter of the Bible, which is not giving you complete information, and that's maybe why you're all asking questions, and that's why I ask questions. But when I found this, I knew I had holes, so I had to fill the holes, so I had to go get the complete version, and this is a complete version. A lot of scholars believe that if you want to go out and actually understand the whole Bible, you need to read the complete Ethiopian or similar Bible so that you can understand what they cut out, because they cut out sometimes just chapters or sometimes full prophets. Okay, so this is extremely important. And you may not agree with anything I'm getting ready to say, but I'm telling you, it's targeting right now, and I found it just before this, and I actually sent a bunch of emails out so I can verify. I don't know if I can I could probably verify it if I really had to, but I'm not going to expose anybody out here. So, this guy Baruch, which was the scribe to Jeremiah, if you go into the very first part of his first chapter in the first book, it gives you a date stamp. Okay, the date stamp, is that he talks about the start and completion of an attack of Nebuchadnezzar in the 5th year of the 7th day in the month of the Chaldeans attack, which would have occurred in history. Don't look at we're looking to today also as it's reflecting history. This attack by the Chaldeans happened it started in the month of July, ends in the month of August, which now you want to think Israel. And you might want to be thinking Turkey right now because Turkey's getting into this game. They're talking extremely tough. They're over at the NATO meeting right now, and I believe they're getting ready to come into this. We're getting ready to go into the month of Av, and so this is one of the cursed months of the Jewish history because the 9th of Av was basically the day the two temples were destroyed, and so we need to watch this date because they're always clamped. So I'm going to bring this verse up in the date stamp that's in the very first verse of the book of Baruch that you can find at Bible Gateway or all these different places because they know these chapters exist. They just don't put them in the King James Version, and so you're not getting the full picture of what is really happening out here. So look at what this says here. And this is extremely important because it's talking about Baruch and the Jews in Babylon. And you're going to see that this reflects a massive event that's happening right now because Turkey's talking tough as they're getting ready to mobilize the UN and NATO against Israel and us because I believe, number one, Turkey will not get his F-35 sales that he's been wanting, and that might be a trigger point because at that point he's just had enough of this because he's been sanctioned forever and this expansion with Israel into Lebanon. He stated, as you'll see in some of the articles as we move forward, that if Israel upsets the ceasefire in any possible way or is contributing to an upset in the ceasefire, that they would attack Israel before they expand into Turkey, which Israel won't do, even though it's part of the footprint of God. That's one of Erdogan's problems and this is his narrative, is that Israel is trying to expand into Turkey over time because their expansion in Gaza, Lebanon, some places in Syria and different things like that, which he's putting up a narrative so that it makes sense to the radical UN NATO nations so that he can mobilize them against us and Israel, and that makes some sense. But let's look at this date stamp because this is extremely important. So I'm going to try to break this down fairly quickly. You can read this part of the prophecy on this page. That's really all you need to look at. I'm going to show you the date stamp in here and the event that should occur after it and how this will matter to us right now. So this is in the book of Baruch. It gives his lineage. I'm not going to go into that. It does talk about him being part of the son of Zedekiah, which then also transfers down in Jehoiakim as we move forward here. So both these kings, Zedekiah, which would be Reuben Revlin today, and Jehoiakim, which would be Issac Herzog of today. He's the president right now. When it talks about, because Zedekiah's lineage is longer, you have to look at the date stamp of the year. When you look at Jehoiakim, it's the 5th year of him in the 7th day of the month during the time of the Chaldeans took Jerusalem and burned it with fire. Well, we're getting ready to watch an attack on Israel from the Iranians and possibly an incursion either through Turkey proxies, through Syria, or Turkey himself, which I believe is getting ready to come into this conflict. Interestingly, he gives you this time of the Chaldeans. Well, the time of the Chaldeans when they took the city of Jerusalem and the temple happened in July, August in the history. And so you're right here, right now, you're getting ready to watch this event occur. The 5th year of Jehoiakim, if you go back and look at that original charting that I showed you about the 4 kings, Issac Herzog's 5th year started yesterday when everything broke. The markets broke. Trump launched due to the Iranian National Guard hitting a Revolutionary Guard, hitting the 3 or 5 tankers. There's a lot going on there, and then Trump retaliates, hits over 80 targets, and then they retaliate and hit some of our bases in Kuwait and Bahrain, and then all of a sudden we're hearing that Iran's going to, or we're going to see an additional attack probably tomorrow or still attacking by the United States, which will then have another retaliatory strike. So you're in the 5th year of this president today. You would have been in the 5th year of that leader in the history books. So that's what I mean. They mimic exactly from past to future, and what should come up, they should be able to tell us through the verses. So Baruch's given him a date stamp right here. So when you go and look at the date stamp, because you have to convert this date stamp that they're giving you from a Gregorian to a Hebrew calendar date, because that's what the Jews would have understood at the time. I will have to show you exactly how that works. It's not really that hard. So if you look, now this is a summary because we're talking about, as you get down in the prophecy, the attack by Nebuchadnezzar and the breaking down of the walls by the Chaldeans in July or August of the year that occurred, which will reflect what's getting ready to happen now in the month of Av, because that's the month we're in or getting ready to go into in the Jewish calendar. I believe we're in the 23rd, 24th of Tammuz right now. 22nd or 3rd, I'm sorry. We'll look at that when we go to the calendar. Issac Herzog's 5th year starts on July 7, 2026. So it's reflecting right now as we move forward. The date stamp, if you actually look at the 7th of Av, would be the 21st of July, and actually the 9th of Av, which is the worst day in the Jewish history, is on the 23rd of Av. But it's interesting that on the 7th of Av, 2 days prior to the temple being destroyed, they broke down the temple walls and then fought for 2 days on the Temple Mount before they were succumbed by Nebuchadnezzar's forces and the Chaldeans. So Erdogan is not going to allow this campaign of Lebanon to keep moving forward with Hezbollah, and as they're expanding, he's been talking about coming into this anyway. But let's go look at the Jewish calendar real quick, and I'll show you sort of how this works. So if you look at the Jewish calendars, because you have to convert the Gregorian date stamp they're given of the month, day, and year of the event, and the actual event or sequencing event that occurs either on that date that moves forward, or it starts around that date and continues to move forward through sequencing of events that the verses tell you are going to happen. So you have to look. I am giving you a one-sentence narrative in the Paradigm 2030 chart, but it actually radiates through the whole prophecy of that prophet. I'm just giving you a summary and the date stamp of when that's supposed to occur from past to now or in the future. So if you go to July of 2026 and you are on the 8th, so we're in the 23rd of Tammuz, okay? When you go to the 5th year of Jehoiakim, he comes in on the 22nd of Tammuz on the 7th. Okay, so this is the start of his 5th year. The 7th day, so you can count this because he's talking about the new month or the new month coming up. Okay, because he's talking about it being in July, August. Okay, so you're moving it into the next month. It's during the time of the Chaldeans attack. You have the worst day possible on the 23rd. The 7th is the day that they broke in the walls, which is the 21st, which is interesting because that's exactly the date stamp that I have on the 7th day of the month of Av. Okay, so it's giving you this information. You can take this information directly out of the Bible. And that's what I mean on all these date stamps that I've been giving you that have been playing out for almost 3.5 years or more. It's giving you the exact information that you need to understand to what is going on right now. The thing I will add to this conversation is this is just one date stamp. I have 22 new books, or a quarter of the Bible, that I can go through and extrapolate all those other date stamps that can be added to the chart, because this date stamp doesn't change my chart at all. It actually just fits directly into the charting. Okay, so he's warning you around the 21st, 23rd, we could see possibly a start of a chain of events that brings Turkey into the room, and this is going to be a real problem for everybody, because Israel and nobody's ready for what's getting ready to happen. I think one of the trigger things that I've been looking at is that Trump may be after NATO, because this NATO, they were building this up to try to get Trump back into all these different groups and things so that he could feel part of NATO, but it's not been that way with this attack of Iran and this breakdown, and maybe that was planned and you don't know what's going on there. But so now he's coming out with a sour feel. I think actually if you go and look at Erdogan, he looks extremely frail, which bothers me, because if he is sick or if something's wrong with him, he may try to accelerate this process, because he's trying to build this new Ottoman Empire and create the new Ottoman, be the new Ottoman emperor, and rebuild the new Ottoman footprint for his centurion legacy. This could be a real problem as we move forward. So we have this build-up because we are in the 5th year of this new leader in Israel that came in July 7, 2021. That's when he was, the president. You're 5 years later. The date stamp gives you the 21st, which is really interesting because it's after the start of the 5th year. So you're in the month of July, August. It's in the month of Av. The 9th of Av, which is the worst day, like I said, and July 23rd is the date this could really get ugly. Maybe Turkey's already in the room. Maybe they're already attacking Israel, because they would attack through Syria and proxies. The 7th day was a bad day because that's when the temple walls were breached. And so I believe you're going to see Erdogan get into this. And with the articles I'm going to show you, I believe that will be the case. And I think you can break this down in your own way and try to figure out what you think is going to happen here. So I have talked about this cycling of events that occur from year to year at times, and how we can see these patterns forming. So the same similar situation occurred last year that's getting ready to happen this year in July, October, and January. This also happened in the history books in the time of Alexander the Great and Nebuchadnezzar's sieges on the Middle East. And you have to go into history. Alexander the Great's footprint is going to be similar. Same thing with Nebuchadnezzar's footprints are all going to be similar to the new Ottoman footprint that Erdogan's getting ready to build here, and has been for 25 years since he came into office in 2003. He's been working on this for 2 to 3 decades at this point. So look at this pattern that keeps happening. In July of last year, at the end of June, we saw Trump actually do the attack of Midnight Hammer on June 22nd, and then by the Sunday right after, that was on a Friday, on the Sunday right after, they started evacuating Lebanon because they were afraid of the attacks by Iran possibly that could happen. And you also had the Hezbollah issue. So Tyre, Lebanon keeps coming up, but now everything is revolving around Tyre, Lebanon, and Lebanon in July. And that's the reason the whole peace talks fell apart, because Iran wanted Hezbollah to have free reign in Lebanon, and it was a sticking point with the Israelis because they're not going to allow a terrorist group to exist on their doorsteps, and Lebanon wasn't being able to control the situation while Turkey's applying pressure from the north through Syria and different things like that. So it's a real problem for the Israelis, and then they're setting up buffer zones way further into the nation of Lebanon than anyone had thought, and you also have the expansion of the Gaza issue also down in the south. In the history books, the Battle of Tyre, Lebanon occurs at around the end of July or in the first part of August. The siege on Tyre, Lebanon, and the completion of that happens around that time. So he's trying to explain that this is all going to happen in around this time in this month frame of July and August. He's trying to give you a date stamp from past to future when and what might reflect this king and the time that we're in and the date stamp that this is occurring in. And so he's giving you all these really interesting things. When you get to October, though, we always seem to end up in Gaza having issue. Same thing with the Battle of Gaza in history, and how the Kurds are being affected by Turkey, and that's actually starting to happen. The Kurds are now under massive duress. They've actually been doing some attacking on Iran, but once Turkey gets into this, these two nations will have to actually align somehow, as Daniel 8 tells us. And then we have a possible destruction of Iran in January of 27 through the Battle of the Persian Gate, as it was in history. It would possibly occur this January. Now, I'm not dogmatic. I'm just saying that these are patterns that seem to be following each other. If this is the case and you get a destruction of the Persian Gate or Iran by January in this environment that we have right now, is easily possible that this could happen. That would then bring 10 nations against Israel around March of 2027, around the same time of the red heifer sacrifice. All that would be happening. They possibly might be trying to even think about rebuilding the temple in the next month or two, and I believe there is date stamps on that chart that says that they will start to rebuild, or at least give you significant information that says they're getting ready to do something maybe by the spring of 2027. If 10 nations form against Israel in March of 27, you will potentially have a sixth seal event, because look, you're not in an Antichrist supernatural phase where he signed a 7-year treaty yet. That has not occurred. The 10 nations have to be destroyed first through a sixth seal destruction of 10 nations. Those 10 nations melt down into a residue of 4, just as it did with Alexander's generals. He fell 4 generals over time in history books. I mean, there was a lot of confusion. They broke into all, fragmented into all kinds of things, but it congealed into basically 4 different regions. In the future, it clearly states that Antichrist will come out of the Seleucid area of one of the 4, which would be Turkey, and that he would overthrow, or they would capitulate to him because they know what he is and that he's a supernatural being and that he's their Allah or whatever. Because I equate Erdogan to like a Muhammad that would die and then turn into an Allah type Antichrist figure. That's sort of how I view it, and that's in my opinion, and you can look at that however you want to look at that also. If you're ushering in, and this is the question I have, if you have a sixth seal event of March 2027, and this is extremely important, and we should be questioning the Bible and things because we need to find the truth and the answers. If you're not questioning and you're just parroting the ministers and things like that, then you could find yourself in a bad place because you really haven't done what you need to do to understand the Bible well enough to. And I hope my best message in this video is that if you believe in the Son Jesus, you will find an open door, because that's the only open door. Okay, but I have to brainstorm this thought, and I want you to think about it just as much as I have. If you're ushering in an Antichrist figure around March 25 of 2027, after the 10 nations get back to Israel, and I use this date for a very specific reason, you would be shortening the second half of tribulation by 1 year. God says he must shorten the second half of tribulation You're in a Shemitah 7-year cycle, which we're going to explain in just a second. You're in the second half of it. That would be the second half of the 7-week period or 7-year period. He clearly tells you in Matthew 24:22, he's shortening it, or the elect will not survive. So that's a two-edged sword, because I thought this would occur and have been talking about this. The midway point would have been March 30th of 2026 to the Feast of Trumpets of September 10th of 2029. That is 1260-day gap period of time. But now he's telling us that he's shortening the second half. He's having Nebuchadnezzar come in around this time. They're going to consume the Middle East within the next 6 to 8 months. You're going to see them end up on Israel's doorstep around March of 27, and that would then compress this a year shorter, which is, I look at it as a 360-day calendar year, because it's a Jewish thing, not a Gregorian thing, and you have to work off the Jewish calendars. So last year, it would have been March 30th, 2026. This year, because you're cutting off the days, it's March 25th of 2027 based on the Jewish calendars. So you're shortening it. Is that what he's doing? That's the question I'm asking. If that's the case, this is a two-edged sword. You're decompressing the beginning of tribulation and birth pains to the time when the 2.5-year period would start, and so it would build up in a slower period of time and not be so radical up to this point, at least to now until we get into March, and then things get really, really bad and magnify in the last 2.5 years, when you should have, based on what I think traditional understanding is, it would have normally happened in a 3.5-year period of time. You're actually compressing it and magnifying it in a 2.5-year period of time, which is a real problem, because it will be much worse than we thought it was going to be, or even dreamed of. You are going through a sixth seal here soon in March, possibly. That is a global potential earthquake type event awakening up the world. Then you have 4 trumpets dropping down, destroying a third of the planet, possibly a third of the coastlines around, California, different things like that. And I've explained how that could occur. And then I have this additional question. I think we have to question these things and look for answers. And a lot of people are going to think I'm blasphemy, whatever you want to call it, a heretic, whatever. I'm just trying to look for the truth, guys. That's all I'm looking for. So if you have a Shemitah cycle that goes from September of 22 to September of 29, which is a 7-year period of time, and Erdogan broke out originally in October 9th of 2019, and then we started to see him start to take over the Middle East by the year 2022. I've always thought you have to look at this a very specific way. If you look at the book of Revelation, the 22 books of Revelation, when John is removed, just John, there is no pre-rapture. You need to understand it's a pre-wrath, pre-bowl rapture on the 7th trumpet, at least in my opinion. You can take that for whatever. Don't throw me away just because I don't believe the same rapture timing. We still can learn from each other. If you take the 7-year period, let's say the beginning of September of 2022, on the beginning of the Feast of Trumpets, and you then visualize when John's getting teleported into heaven on Revelation 4:1, he sees what? An open door and a trumpet sounds. That's the beginning of the trumpet, the Feast of Trumpets in 2022. You're working through 7 years in the last week of Jacob. So that would go from September 2022 to September 2029. Erdogan is a flesh antichrist right now. He's been consuming the Middle East for 20 some, almost 30 years. But he's going to die on a sixth seal event, as Ezekiel 38:39 tell us. All nations that attack Israel will be consumed. They'll have a plague placed on them. They'll kill each other. The leader dies. He's buried. And then if you go to Isaiah 14, it clearly tells you when Satan is thrown out of heaven on the fifth trumpet that he is getting the key to the bottomless pit, resurrecting a supernatural antichrist and bringing him forth in the middle of the week. I know that seems pretty far-fetched, but that's what the Bible is telling you. And maybe that's why we get this wrong, because, I fought this whether Erdogan was actually an antichrist, but he really doesn't come up until the fifth trumpet. And so what is he? Is he a flesh antichrist that dies, resurrects into a supernatural being that is controlled by Satan? Because both the Satan and the false prophet are controlled by Satan. Now, we don't know where Satan is when he falls to earth. We don't really get a lot of that until the last chapter, like 1920, when they actually start throwing the false prophet and the Antichrist in the lake of fire, and they bind Satan himself for the 1,000-year millennial period. So you don't get an idea really where Satan's at. You do understand that when he does fall, he brings forth some kind of a being out of an abyss, that he gets a key, unlocks hell, brings forth this abominable branch onto the planet, and then converts him into some supernatural being that controls the world. So he's not a flesh being because he's died. If you go into Isaiah 14, it clearly states that this being that's in the ground has worms and things all over it. You can look at the imagery there. It's not just a flesh being, and that's why I get frustrated with the churches or people in general when they say it's some person. But maybe we don't understand. Maybe Antichrist in flesh. And it's interesting. I just had done a video. I'm going to linger on this too much, but I just did a video about Nostradamus, how he predicted we'd have 3 antichrists and then the end would come. He was talking about a flesh antichrist in Napoleon, a flesh antichrist in Hitler, and a flesh antichrist that would end up being a supernatural antichrist at the end, which would be a Islamic leader, which seems to reflect Erdogan of today. Okay? So I say the next 6-7 months into this is going to turn us into an Antichrist phase. Right around this 25th of 2027, you possibly could see a signing of a treaty. I want to throw one last thought down. So if we do go to the spring of 27 and we see the nation of Iran fall in or around the end of January, which could easily happen right now based on what's going on, we have to start coming into this set of months and looking at the Jewish calendars and finding out what's going on, because you have the new Jewish month or year starting on Nisan 1. Jesus dies on Passover on Nisan 14. That's when he's crucified. And so then we start into Passover. But this is interesting because right after you start the first of the year, and he talks about that March 25th date, or about that halfway mark, or the 2.5-year mark between March 25th of 2027 and the Feast of Trumpets of September 10th of 2029, you have Nisan 2. And this is interesting because I'm starting to see articles coming out about how they're trying to prepare and get ready for a ceremony of the red heifer sacrifice. And it's interesting because 2 Nisan is actually the first preparation of the red heifer. So, and if you go into the charting in August, based on other date stamps I've given you, they're talking about actually implementing a restarting of a building of a third temple or antichrist temple at this time, because he will destroy the third temple, which is actually antichrist. And when you get to millennial, you don't need that temple because you have God and Jesus with you. So I just wanted to go over a lot of these different things. I think it's extremely important that we understand what we are coming into, and I believe that this book of Baruch is giving us an extremely important piece of information. And then right after he explains this to us, how Nebuchadnezzar is going to come in and attack Israel and take the vessels away, as it happened in the past. You also get Zedekiah in place, because this is possibly the time the leader of Israel, Issac Herzog, could be captured. I keep talking about these things. You got to follow history. It isn't me saying this. History says it could happen. That Zedekiah would be placed into a position, which would be Reuben Revlin, because Nebuchadnezzar would take his son Jehoiakim and Jehoiachin captive approximately about the same time, because he goes down and captures the father, and then he comes back, captures the son, and then they end up in Persia, and then they come. Yeah. So I would be watching this, and then he warns Jerusalem right after this date stamp. He's warning them what they should be getting ready for, which is the king of Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon, which would be Erdogan of Turkey today, that they need to confess their sins and get ready, because they're getting ready to go under judgment, which is what I keep telling them. Look, you have, and I'm going to explain this, and I'm going to stop. And I'm sorry I get a little animated and stuff like that, and I get excited, and so I don't know if people like that type of teaching. But so think about this, and I think this is a good way to end this video. You need to understand the two ideologies on both sides of the table. The Muslims, even the Iranians, are mandated in their documents, whatever, constitution, whatever they have. I don't really follow them a lot, but I know it's in there because I've seen a lot of this stuff. They have a mandate to destroy Israel. It's in their DNA. They aren't going to get that out of there. It tells them in that mandate that they have to accelerate this process so they can bring all of them, their Mahdi, whoever this is, they want to bring back, and that would then complete the end time scenario. Israel is ideologically driven, but they're mistaken in their understanding, in my opinion. So Israel, and I think this is what Netanyahu's doing, I believe that he thinks that if he accelerates the expansion of stuff like that, as they've been saying, and I've been listening on many of the Jewish broadcasts, that God is going to come in and save them somehow. If you look at Revelation, it clearly says you're going under judgment. Okay, judgment. 2/3 of you will perish, either by sword, plagues, famine, whatever, and 1/3 of that will be removed. When will that happen? Around March of 2027, approximately around the red heifer sacrifice period of time. He removes the remnant because they're the true believing Jews. They believe in Jesus. They believe in the Son of God, and so they're removed and they're taken away because he has a special population in the world that he loves. He loves us all, but he loves this group because they're actually Jews that live in one of the worst corrupted cesspools it's terrible in Jerusalem. The idolatry, the sodomy, the whatever's going on over there right now is at an astronomical level that we've never seen before, probably even since the Roman period of time, and all this technology and stuff has not helped all this. Okay? He's telling you what's going on here. He's telling you what's getting ready to happen. They need to confess. They need to get ready to be taken away. It's going to affect Egypt. It's going to affect the Kurds. It's going to affect Iran. It's going to affect all these different groups. So just get ready, because this is not pretty. The oils are going to spike massively once they figure this is a real war again, and that this is spreading quite rapidly. Turkey could be affected and brought into this. The bonds are spiking. That's going to cause defaults and all kinds of problems in loans and different things like that. Commodities, equities are getting ready to collapse. They will then finally, once you hit a bottom and this all collapses, you'll see a parabolic move up. So there's probably going to be a fire sale down here somewhere. The dollar is destroying the yen and other different currencies all over the world, and they're selling their bonds back because they need dollars to pay the debt down because they can't control the situation. The liquidity is not there, and all that then comes back to hyperinflate us. You have high inflation with low job numbers, so even the Fed cannot raise rates now like they were going to because the 2-year bond spiked up. He's following the 2-year bond. He's about almost a point off of it now. If you raised a point, the markets would capitulate. He can't do that because he's got terrible job numbers and high inflation. If he raises rates, he'll restrict, so then he can't loan. The banks won't loan. They can't loan anyway in this environment, so nobody can get money. And the money that we have is debt because they produce this in thin air and then give you loans and credit and all this stuff. There's no cash out here in general, and none of you mostly use cash at this point. So you're going to see Bitcoin collapse. You're going to see gold, silver collapse. You're going to see the bond spike. I talked about how the 2-year will probably go around 5 or maybe higher. You would see the 30-year push up at least to 5.5, and I said you could probably chart it to 6.5, which would then destroy the lending markets and things like that. Private credit would have all kinds of different issues. They're pumping all this money into things. Even the educational fund that Trump put together is all going into one fund. So if this collapses, you're going to lose all your money at one time. And you can't explain this to people because they just don't. And I'm not an expert on this stuff. It just makes sense. You are watching possibly earnings going to wane as we move into this third quarter, and you have an AI bubble that's compressing and probably getting ready to break because look, they can build the data centers all day long, but they don't have the capacity, as we see in our power bills as they rise, to push this out through the infrastructure. And so this is going to cause all kinds of brownouts, blackouts, and other kinds of issues because they're going to supply the data centers. And this is going to start to get extremely interesting. So you need to be paying attention to what is getting ready to happen. He is telling us that Nebuchadnezzar, Turkey, is getting ready to possibly break out around this time, and that we need to be aware of this so that we can actually be prepared for what's getting ready to happen. Because when this does break, you've already got the opening of the Red Sea and different things like that. Let's go through a couple real quick articles, and I'll show you what I'm talking about on just the last few days, and then we'll stop this video. So we're just going to go over some real quick articles, and I'm going to end this video because it leads up to where we are now. You've had massive earthquakes that are happening. You had the back-to-back Venezuelan earthquake. You've had a number of earthquakes around the Ring of Fire, and so these are amplifying and magnifying. You can see that I posted this on June 29th. Pakistan and Afghanistan are starting to get into this. The Kurds are starting to get hammered again by Turkey and Iran, actually, but the Iranians and the Kurdish will align once Turkey gets into the game. Israel indicates through their defense minister that Israel could go to war with Iran at any time. U.S. has been in multiple different meetings from Doha, Qatar, you name it, Egypt, all kinds of places in the last few months trying to figure out how to get this ceasefire going. Hezbollah is drawing a red line. They're saying they're not going to get out of this game. This is causing issues for both Israel, Lebanon, and everybody else from Turkey in the area, as Israel's doing expansion to try to eliminate this threat on their northern border. We're seeing waves of attack on the Kurdish people. That will then become a real issue. You're in July right now. That will become a main issue in October based on history. all these events that are happening are leading up to where we are today, which is all these different attacks that are occurring. They're trying to broker all these deals. Nothing seems to be working. The attacks are rising on the Kurdish people by July the 2nd. Again, you had another warning shot against Turkey in a 0.3 magnitude earthquake. Your job numbers in the United States are falling off, but then if fuel goes up, your inflation will go up, and that will then cause the Fed not to be able to raise, and that will just stagflate the whole economy. They can't lower rates. They won't be able to raise rates. They probably won't do anything. If the 2-year bond spikes to 5, they won't have a choice, and then you'll see a parabolic raise of maybe 100 basis points or higher. That would then force the markets and equity to lose faith in the Fed, and then that would capitulate the markets, and they would collapse to a certain degree. I don't know exactly what that collapse might be, but you do in history go back. This could, as it has been in the Dow and the markets, has been parabolic, and you have not had a major correction for some time. You could see a 70 to 90% correction if this all collapses. This is extremely important because I believe this blast in Damascus could be blamed on potentially the Kurds or some other group that would then potentially bring Turkey in, because Turkey is using Syria as a proxy at this moment in time. And as you can see, the Kurds are having they're starting to get more losses. They're getting ambushed. They're having all kinds of issues. A lot of this is being brought forward through Turkey proxies in Iraq and Syria. Iran, Oman's been proposing fees on the Strait of Hormuz. That's not going to cut it with Trump. No one, and it was an open trade before, so they're not going to allow people to charge. We are not getting all the components and things we need to put the radars and things in our planes, and then we're also talking about giving F-35s to Turkey, or refurbishing packages or different things to keep up their F-35s that they have, because they are a NATO group. If you look at Erdogan, I believe he's mobilizing NATO and the UN against Trump and us, or Israel, and so you need to watch that. We had the burial of the Iranian leader, and that will end on the 6th, or it's a 6-day thing. That'll end on Thursday. And so this is interesting that the Iranian Revolutionary Guard would actually attack us during that funeral period. Greece is starting to ban all mosques across the country because they know that the Muslims are starting to become a problem, especially in Europe and different things. And we've seen our own armies of Muslims marching in the streets in our own cities, and I'm not against the Muslims. I am against the radical Muslims that could potentially try to do something biblical against us in our own country. I mean, come on, don't come here. Stay over there. I know we've gone over there and done a lot of damage, so this could be karma coming back. Shipping cargo ships have been hit off the Red Sea, and we've had attacks through the Houthis in the last few days on July 5th, so the Red Sea is still a problem. That will affect Egypt. Going back to October, you get into Egypt. It will also affect the trade into the Mediterranean Sea and up around Israel. Netanyahu is defying their Supreme Court and saying they have the right to escalate this crisis. As you can see, there's another attack on the Houthis. Turkey is intensifying. Now, I talked about this a little bit earlier. Turkey is doing a major crackdown on his population. He's literally jailed his opposition. He's cracking down not only on the public, but he's cracking down on NATO at this Turkish meeting in Ankara, which is happening now. Trump's over there and they talking. Trump is saying that Erdogan is saying that he wants his F-35s. I don't think they should be given to them because he's a hostile player. Been talking about this for almost 6 years. And I believe this might be one of the sticking points that brings Erdogan in. If he doesn't get that, he may try to fracture Trump and Israel away from NATO and the UN so that he can control those entities, so that when he comes into the game, he has support from the international community, and this could be a real problem. Iran fired on 3 to 5 ships. They were hit. That's going to then cause the shipping to shut down, fuel to go up, which we saw overnight, a 5% or higher increase rate of percentage of increase on fuel. That will go up. That will probably go up extensively. It could X up 2 or 3 times if this completely falls apart, and you could then back into that October potential embargo or some type of problem with the oil systems. And so what you're going to see up front here is you might see a little glut of oil because they got some of the tankers out that were already filled, and so some of these ports and things got oil, and so there might be what they small regional gluts and things. But once this shuts back down, then you would start to recapture all those ships in the Persian Gulf. They would be trapped again, and they would not be able to move the oil, and then you have strategic reserve drawdowns, and so you would then run into a massive shortfall of oil as you move forward. I talked about this in the very beginning of the text file. Israel recognized Armenia, and Turkey is not happy about that. Then right after that, within the last 24 hours, we see these attacks. Because of the attacks by Iran on the tankers, cargo ships, and things like that, we've hit over 80 targets. Hamas is telling us they're going to dissolve the Gaza government and basically control that. Iran is going to do a retaliatory strike and feel that they have the right to legally control and charge tolls and things like that, which will not go over well as this whole peace talks are breaking down. Iran did strike targets in Bahrain and Kuwait in the last few hours, last 12 hours or so. That then was another retaliation by Trump, and now we are seeing Trump state that he doesn't care that the ceasefire exists, and that he's probably going to hit the Iranian targets again tonight or in the next day, and then you would see possibly another retaliation by Iran as we move forward. So this is really ramping up. I believe the date stamp gives us exactly what we need to understand. And once I get to the point where I can get the Ethiopian books broken down and find out what's in the 22 chapters, my guess is that we will get some answers on additional date stamps within those books. Possibly date stamps prior today within the Shemitah cycle, and date stamps as we move forward into the future to the end of the Shemitah cycle, and I won't know until I do that, or there may not be any additional date stamps. I will have to break this down and find out. I do not believe it will take me that long to go through these and find them, so hopefully I can update you on that as we move forward. But I would be watching between now and the end of August, because that's when the Chaldeans attacked, and see how this Iranian, Turkish, Hezbollah, Israel, Gaza, and all the other things going on pans out in the next almost 2 months, because this is going to be a long 2 months if this is what's getting ready to happen. So God bless everybody. Find Jesus, find the open door, believe that He's giving you possibly the answers that you need to understand to see what's getting ready to happen, to prepare your networks, your people, your family, to inform, to warn them what's coming so they can have food and supplies in their homes so they can weather this thing out, because we have to bunker down and try to get through this next. And I'll give you, and I don't, look, I believe that he comes back in the fall feast during the Feast of Trumpets. You can say whatever you want. I believe that happens at the end of the Shemitah cycle in the around the September 10th of 2029. I can't give you the exact date. The Feast of Trumpets 2-day period, so I don't know the exact time or date. If you are moving to the Feast of Trumpets of 2029, September 10th of 2029, then we're 1961 days from that period of time. And so we have to decide whether that matters. So God bless. Be safe out there. Hopefully you had a great 4th of July. And I believe things are getting ready to get really interesting. And find the Lord Jesus. God bless.